excited to introduce to you the first keynote of ISMAR 2021, Mar Gonzalez Franco. She's a researcher in the EPIC, Extended Perception, Interaction and Cognition team at Microsoft Research. Mar focuses on exploring human behavior and perception to build better technologies on the wild. Apart from her excellent scientific career, she contributed to the existing product like Together Mode in Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Soundscape. So I'm very happy to give the floor to Mar. Thank you, Mar, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen here. I wanted to, I'll talk a bit about my research, but I wanted to give this frame of the metaverse because I think we're hearing a lot about it. And I think there is fiction in it and there is reality, and we have to understand how we can fit the research that we can do into it. So first, a bit about me. I'm originally from Spain, and I've been a bit all over the place. And for the last 5 years, I've been at Microsoft Research in Redmond. You can find more about me on my website. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the metaverse. So this is a term that you must be hearing recently more and more. But it was coined in 1992 in Neil Stephenson's novel, Snow Crash. And 30 years on, nobody is really very clear on what it actually is, right? So different people will have different interpretations of the metaverse. And I wanted to share a small video of Ready Player One, the movie. And, there is a book originally of one vision of what the metaverse could be.
Except the Oasis. A whole virtual universe.
Let me take you on a trip around the world and back.
People come to the Oasis for all the things they can do.
And you won't have to wait to sit still.
But they stay because of all the things they can be.
Can you feel this?
Let me show you the world.
Yeah. It's the only place that feels like I mean anything.
Okay, so here you can see several aspects of the metaverse, right? That here they call it the Oasis. You have some wearables. You're connected to many other people, and then there are all these aspects of it, right? So the common description will be this: an online world that fulfills real world desires and activities, right? So he's basically running things that you would do in real life, but through a virtual platform, right? And there is this social aspect of it that many people need to connect in order for it to really be a metaverse. And if you ask me, it is about social, right? And it's not surprising that social media companies are very interested in it. But I also think it's very interesting, the other aspects of it, like it requires a lot of cross-content interaction, an ecosystem of devices and operating systems, data persistency network. It has this fluidity that you can go in and out. And I think in general, it's a land for applied research. So that should be of the interest of people in the community. And is it becoming a reality? So we're seeing examples of things that are starting to be more of a metaverse, a real life application, right? Products that we can have, or like the Horizon Workrooms from Facebook that was released recently, which is only for meetings. And also, things like alter ego.
In augmented reality, singers' alter egos are transported through the lens onto the real world stage. Yep.
So this is a new TV show that's starting here in the US, where these singers are represented by avatars. And I feel like we're starting to see that this intersecting with reality. And I think it's not like the metaverse we were seeing in the movies, in which you go there and you evade from reality. Is going to be more mixed, right? It's more of an augmented experience. You go in, you go out. Here, for example, is cross device. They are presenting something that they are seeing on a laptop. So you have to be able to move from one device to another, to inside virtual reality, bring it with you. So it's more connected than we think. And even I think it's very much at the infancy. You think of the, these meeting rooms, and then you have threads online. I love this one of, it looks very boring. You're just doing exactly the same that you do in reality, right? Could you do something much more interesting? And I feel like, now that we have so many meetings, some of them were so good, like this one. Every meeting you have a limb remove, and by the end of the day, you're just like a head. And if somebody comes to the meeting, you're like, oh, poor guy, he's been in meetings the whole day. So there are many things we can do in virtual reality that we cannot do in reality. And I think that's part of the metaverse, is kind of figuring out, or how the metaverse is going to attract people, is because it's going to give things that you cannot do in reality. And still, I think we're at the infancy, because there are many problems in how we put these virtual worlds and the real worlds together. And one of them, for example, is locomotion, right? Like, okay, you might have that super big virtual world, but this is really how the one-to-one walking feels. Like, you don't even make it through the street in a real setup. And I've been interested on the locomotion part. And I think a lot of people have work on
Wireless
locomotion,
headsets.
right? And there are many ways that you can augment the ways that people can travel through VR. Like, you can be just speed gaining, or being a giant. And so this early project sort of sparked this interest of ours on locomotion. And we even try to figure out other things, like, for example, in mise en scene, where we were using the eye gaze to solve, try to figure out, oh, if you're not looking here, we can maybe interact with the virtual environment to change things that are on your periphery, and then that could have some interest. And in particular, I wanted to show here a bit some of the possible changes we could do to reduce motion sickness, to improve things that have to do with locomotion, right? Like using eye gaze. So there are many possible ways to do locomotion. And, we ended up figuring out, okay, how many ways are there to do locomotion? How many things have people invented? And then we created this database, which is the Locomotion Vault, that has all these possible locomotion techniques, over 100 of them. And it's open to, growth, because it's interactive. And, and then we started exploring, okay, let's put them all together here. And let's try to figure out how they relate to each other, what the attributes are that look similar in one locomotion technique to another. And all of these locomotion techniques could work in the metaverse, right? So it's not very clear which choices will be made for the metaverse. And you'll be like, oh, wow, why are you going so deep in locomotion? Because, the metaverse seems like something much bigger. This is just an example. because I think every aspect of virtual reality, you could create a database of, right? Like for controllers, for motion sickness techniques, for avatars, for like every single part of it has all these many options, right? And so that's why I think we're a bit on the infancy, because we don't have clear choices of what is going to be the solution for different problems, right? Like how do people move here? We don't know how we, and perhaps we have to have an holistic way, like, a passport of locomotion techniques that you bring with you, because a person might need different things to locomote in VR. And why haven't we have this until now, really? I mean, in conferences like this one, for many years, we've been thinking of spatial computing, but in general, this is arriving to the consumer, this idea that the content is not anymore inside the screen, and now the user is inside the content, right? This is a paradigm shift, and there are many things we need to explore behind it. And also, it hasn't happened until now in the consumer, because we had these slow connectivities, which now with the edge and 5G coming is changing, right? It was very expensive hardware, but now we have these wearable and devices that are consumer price, connectivity, infrastructure of servers, cloud, things like Microsoft Mesh, for example, just came out this year. It's very hard to represent people, getting avatars, animate them, motion tracking, all these things are getting easier now. And one thing that I think it's not yet solved is like, it's not very inclusive. I think a screen is very inclusive because a person can use different devices to interact with it, but HMD, some people cannot even wear it, right? So it's, or put it on. So I think all of these things are keeping us from the full potential, and many of them are being solved. That's why we can now start talking about, metaverse and consumer VR. I saw this interesting survey and poll on the internet the other day, and I was like, network, right? Like you're like choosing network and being sure it's going to be 100% the network and cloud is the problem. And then I saw this openness, interoperability, and I was mind blown. How is that the biggest problem for the metaverse? And then I was like, oh yes, yeah, interoperability. So this is the list of all the social VR platforms and virtual worlds, and each one of them is a different possible metaverse, and they don't talk to each other. Different technologies, different avatars, different, everything is different. So yeah, I kind of started understanding, I was trying to figure out why people are saying it's interoperability, and now I'm like pretty sure this is one of the biggest challenges we have. Sort of colliding all of this into something that, people can meet in the same place. So there's some good news, and I think there are many areas of research and opportunities unknowns to be solved on the metaverse. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this before, digging deep into which areas I'm interested on, is that I think we should be hopeful as a community that there is going to be plenty of opportunities to work on this area of research. So few of the things that really interest me on fixing in the metaverse is the sensory experiences, the perception. I think in general, in virtual reality and augmented reality, there is this content surrounding us, and it's not just visual, right? Like we can only see here, we can hear much more, we can hear things on our back, that's a very simple thing. And then there is also all the problems that come when you try to touch an hologram or a virtual object and it's not there, right? So these two parts are something that I've been working quite a lot. But I come from, real-time systems. So my first approach to perception, and I think everyone who approaches perception in VR, AR, sort of finds these two big problems. One is latencies, right, and how to measure them. And the other is motion sickness. And so perception and those are open problems, is not solved. It's very hard to publish any paper on any of these two areas, which is, very surprising sometimes, because that's the only way we can advance. And I think we should, as a community, be more open to publications in these areas. So one of the problems with the motion sickness publications is that, all these people from the 80s or 90s published these super long reports, perhaps on the military motion sickness. And now it's hard to just even beat them, right? But then the technology has evolved so much. So I think we have to reconsider everything that we find basic of motion sickness might need reconsideration. And then latency is this other big issue, right? All of the devices, and the moment we network many other devices, we start adding latencies and things that I think need exploring. So here this is something we presented last year, and it was an interesting proposal for using human actions, right, like rapid decision-making tasks, to figure out what's the latency on the system. If I present you with a particular target or task, how long do you take to respond to it, right? So if you have that scales very nicely, because you can have a lot of people doing this particular task, which is an immediate task, and then you can calculate how many milliseconds they took to respond. And that could tell you a lot about latency. So you have deployed a latency control system across your network through something like that. I think that those type of larger scale latency systems are something we need to explore more. But then I move out from systems really to explore perception in different ways. And those are still open problems. One of them is about recalibrating of audio. I think we generally, one of the problems that I see with sound is, okay, if we really need HRTFs to be personalized for every person, it's gonna take forever for consumers to really use this, because you need a scan of your head. It's very hard to have a personalized HRTF. So we ran a study, and it's a quite annoying study. You kind of move your head around trying to see where the sound is coming from, and then you point and you click, right? Now it's coming from somewhere else. So this is the test. Then you have different stimulation things, like following a ball around the space, and that the sound is attached to it in different configurations, and then you run again the test of figuring out where the sound is coming from. And so what we find is that people actually get better very fast, right? And generic HRTF seem to be pretty good for spatial sound. Some more experiments on things that you can only do in VR. Okay, now we have a spatial sound. Can we have multiple people talking at the same time, or is it gonna be a problem? And you can be 30% better at distinguishing multiple people once you have a spatial sound. So that makes the possibility of a social environment inside VR or AR far more interesting, right? And in general, with the spatial sound, you can do things like navigate around the world, try to find different beacons. And this is interesting because it's an augmented experience that is not based on visual, right? So the idea here is that you ask people to go to a specific location, and generally you would follow a map right? But if you have this beacon system,
GPS can regain an active role to navigate.
You just turn around the phone and you'll go to a particular direction based on where you're hearing the sound coming from, okay? So the experience is very different. You're just hearing where the sound is coming from. I can talk more about it, but imagine a church or a minaret, a mosque somewhere producing sound and you trying to go there, right? It's a very similar experience. The other part, a part of sound that I've been working on a bit is haptic touch, right? All this idea that you want to be able to do this type of experience, right? Grab an object, a virtual object, squeeze it, move it, have this dexterity, drop it. Perhaps, you know, it comes to your hand, a device. Perhaps it looks more like a thong that stops you from going into an object. And we've done a lot of experiments on this area. It's not as random as it looks. We're trying to solve many different hand object type of interactions, like, you know, touch or manipulation or kinetic information, dexterity, compliance, weights. You know, there are so many parts of it. So for each part of it, we sort of have gone into different implementations. This is an area where the team I'm working on was working even before I joined. And, you know, it's been over 5 years now, and we have a lot of prototypes there. So I'm just going to show a couple of them that are more promising, right? This one, for example, it's very, very simple, and it allows you to do things like this, right? So this is what you would want to do with a real object. And now we're going to see a virtual object, right? So this is what you can achieve with this type of device. And this is the device, right? So you can basically have a proxy of a hand with it and have that type of experience with just these few sensors. We can go more about it in the questions if you have questions on the design, but I just want to give an overview. This is a different style of device, right? The idea here also was to minimize the number of motors and actuators. So it only has these two small motors, and we use a capstan like on a boat to try to amplify whatever effect that we are trying to do, like brake, or so we don't have a motor working against human forces because that's very hard to do. And we can also have a small spring attached to it that will allow you to have elastic objects. And then this is a pivot that is also a very interesting device. It's hands-free, and it appears whenever you want it on your hand, right? So this video is awesome also. You can find it online. So we have been working quite a bit on controllers, and there are more coming in the next 2 weeks. So keep tuned. And then we are also working a bit on this idea of tabletop haptics, right? For example, you know, many things that happen on our desktop could be mechanized in a way so you can interact better with the content. So we've been trying to create shape displays with less actuators because, you know, if you put 100 actuators that each cost $10, you know, it's already a lot of money. And some of these displays are also prone to errors, like one actuator breaks, or so we're trying to create a new type of material here that starts from a solid rigid. We do a pattern cut that is an aesthetic cut, and then we can cover it, and that gives us a lot of you know, rigidity, but at the same time bendable, right, in multiple directions. So generally, when you stretch an object, it shrinks in the opposite axis, right? So here we're able to shrink an object in one axis without shrinking on the other. So that allows for this type of motions. And this is something we just published in Nature Communications, and it's part of the visiting research work that we did with Anthony Steed when he was here. And we have recently been working on other types of, devices actuated across your desktop. So imagine you have small robots coming to you, so you can just touch on different surfaces or, use them to interact. So here there are two parts. One is like figuring out where the hand is going to be, right? So you can be there on time, and then interact with the objects in different ways. I think this is the nicest demo. Yeah, here at the end of this, you can see, especially for things like virtual reality or augmented reality, this could be of interest, right? And this one will be out in use next week. So there is some theoretical background to all these haptic devices, right? We need to converge. One of the things that I want to highlight is we found this uncanny valley of haptics that seems to govern many things. And I want to put an example of what this really means in reality, because the experiment we run in the paper is a bit complex to understand, with that dowel and things bouncing in between your hands. And imagine that you're in VR and something touches your back, and you turn around and there is an avatar behind it. You'll be like, oh my God, this is so good, very good experience. The same touch, if there is no avatar behind you, will just break your illusion, right? It's a haptic experience that completely breaks your experience, because you're gonna think there is someone outside virtual reality, right? And then you remove your helmet or your HMD and you look back and there is a person outside, right? So that's the same with haptics in general. And I think in the current devices that we have, right, it's more like a buzzing machine. So I think this kind of alert breaks the experience more than it helps, right? So we have to figure out, if we're gonna do haptics, it needs to be really embedded in a multisensory experience, which brings me a little bit to this other part of all the illusions that you can do in virtual reality with perception. And so I want to close a little bit our sensory perception part of the presentation by saying, we try to put kind of together the sensory motor model, particular implications for virtual reality in that paper. And then we find other interesting small things when we do these experiments, like, oh, grasp is asymmetric, right? Like in the same way that the crocodile can close the mouth very strongly, but never open it. So if you just hold a closed crocodile, they are very weak at opening the mouth. It's similar with the hand, right? Like hand is very good at squeezing things and getting information about it, but really doesn't care when it opens the hand. The attention is gone most of the time out of there, and you don't feel any more information about, for example, the stiffness of the object, or all these things are already defined when you grasp, right? Not when you release. And we also have some work on haptic retargeting that is coming out of all these illusions and theory background of haptics. Let's go back to the metaverse a little bit. So the metaverse certainly has this sensory aspect that we need to improve and have more understanding there. And as you see, we have been diverging into many controllers, many experiments around it. It's not very clear which one is the one that will stay there. But then once we're in the metaverse, it also feels like we're alone, right? Partially because of that sparsity of so many possible platforms. But I think also because we don't have a good setup of avatars yet. And the truth is that avatars are more important than ever. And this is from 2016. It features several of my work here, was trying to help make the case that, you know, we need avatars. And still now I feel like we're getting better. And also we have to understand that the sensory experience are important together with the avatars, right? Like here, there is an avatar touching another avatar. But in general, we have sensory experience about our own body, right? Like if a body is gonna represent us this embodiment illusion. And that's why I sort of started with the sensory experience first before going into the avatars, because this is intrinsic, right? The avatars will need to understand, they have all these aspects of the sensory experience into them. And when we talk about avatars, you know, it's such a big range also, the spectrum. From abstract to 3D scans to, you know, it's very large. In particular, lately, I've been working quite a lot with this type of avatars, which are sort of parametric in a way. And we put together quite a long paper when we released the Microsoft Rocketbox library. But also it's a paper that talks a lot about avatars in general. What do you need? What can they be used for? How can they be created, right? So I think I recommend that lecture also. And why are avatars important? We basically measure everything with our body, everything, right? Like I'm gonna grab this cap and I know how big it is by how big my hand is. And, you know, I compare it to, so we use our body as a measure machine for almost everything, to perceive things, to interact, to so it feels obvious that we need avatars. And this is one example of that I find very interesting also, of an experiment that we did. And we asked people to see a spot in the floor, and then they would go blank, right? And we asked them, walk towards there. And many people undershoot, right? So there is a problem in virtual reality in general that people will undershoot by 10, 20% the distance that they need to travel. But the better they felt embodied in their avatar, the less undershooting they did. So then you can see that here on the right. You know, people who felt more embodied had less distance compression, and here also. And this is interesting because we didn't have two different conditions in this experiment. Everybody experienced the same condition, and everybody had to do the same task. And despite that, we had clearly two groups of participants. Some that were very embodied on the avatar, and therefore they perform much better than the other ones. So it's clear that there are very important individual differences in the experiments we run. And that is because of embodiment. And embodiment is this effect that, oh, you look around, you're inside this avatar, you can control it, you have agency. You're in first person experience, right? Like you look down and there is this avatar, you know, that is substituting your body, and you have ownership over it. So this is something I've been working quite a bit on, is embodiment research, and I did most of it during my PhD with Mel Slater. And one thing that I guess everyone goes through this once you start working on embodiment, the first thing is how do I create embodiment, right? So we have a couple of interesting ways to do that. I'm not gonna enter too much in deep there. There are a lot of papers about it, and there is all this work on the rubber hand illusion and motor sensory motor synchronies, motor actions. But in general, I think it's very easy to create embodiment. You put a person co-located with a body, even if the body doesn't move, you will start having this embodiment of that body, right? So the next question is, how do we measure embodiment, right? And I was very skeptical at the beginning, thinking, oh, people answer questionnaires. This seems like you could cheat or lie. I want to do real recordings of this. So I did a lot of brain analysis, and for example, in one of my experiments, I was attacking the virtual hand similar to the rubber hand illusion, right? And with a knife that would cut you or not. And you would find this mirror rhythm desynchronization in the motor cortex that was very clear. This is when the hand is attacked. You see this dropped in power for the frequencies on the mirror rhythm. And that doesn't happen if you don't attack the hand, right? Like it's just a table. And there are other effects of it, like the readiness potential, etc. And then one of the interesting things when I was doing all these experiments is that they correlate, these physiological responses correlate very well generally with the questionnaires. So it's sort of validated questionnaires. And after a while, I realized, okay, questionnaires are important, but we don't have a standard questionnaire, right? This is a problem because if questionnaires are a good way to measure embodiment, but everybody is asking different questions, that makes no sense. So with Professor Tabitha Peck, we went deep and we say, okay, after the rubber hand illusion, let's take experiments from the most known labs around the world, from INRIA to EPFL, Stanford, everyone who's doing experiments on embodiment. And then we extracted these 25 questions. Then last year, and then we've been using those questionnaires for our experiments, and I think many people are using them. And last year, we were able to finally validate whether those questions make sense or not. So after doing many experiments and 400 questionnaires, we were able to improve the questionnaire. And now we only have 16 questions. It's far more universal. We just published this late last year, and I recommend you using this questionnaire better than this other one moving forward, which has the same questions, just it's a subset. So it's also backward compatible. And I feel like we really need people to use the same metric to measure embodiment. And then other things that really interest me on embodiment research, one of them was, how do we break it, right? So I did this experiment on Eris and flanker arrows. So you see the task is you need to follow the middle arrow, but sometimes it's a bit confusing because there are more arrows indicating in different ways. But the important thing is that your hand needs to go to the middle arrow. And here you can see a participant doing the experiment. And what we did is, bam, every so often the hand of the avatar would go just in the opposite direction of whatever the participant is doing. So it would keep, the participant is still moving the hand, but it will be mirror, right? Mirror in speed, mirror in everything. And we did that every 20 trials, because if not, you would just go not just there. You saw it. And then we explore what happens, right? And it clearly dropped the embodied experience here. And what we found is a strong posterior error negativity at 400 milliseconds on the when that error was introduced, which is different than planning errors like the error-related negativity. And that's interesting because, I mean, you really need to do something very drastic to break embodiment, right? Like here, the avatar is really going in the opposite direction. That was one of the interesting findings, is that it's quite hard to break embodiment. And generally, what will happen if you have a drift or something like that,
transition users in
people would just start following their avatar a little bit, right? Like if the avatar goes somewhere, they'll just start going there to try to match the avatar. And that's something we presented last year, but I think many people have found this in an empirical way, right? Like it's hard to break embodiment. Even the asynchronous conditions sometimes report high embodiment. Another aspect of avatars that I've been very interested on is the lookalike faces and the external appearance of avatars, right? Do they need to look like us? Can I recognize myself if I have an avatar that looks like me? So we did some experiments on this, and we found that if you have real faces, these are just figures, pictures of you, you see that the self person, so yourself, will always have almost a 1 microvolt of power less on the visual cortex, about 200 milliseconds after you show the images, right? So you recognize yourself pretty well on images. And if it's a virtual face and it's your virtual face, you know, it's maybe just half a microvolt, but it's still significant. So you can recognize yourself on an avatar, and you do recognize yourself on a very early stage already, right? So this is a fast recognition. And over time, also, this is the difference between looking at a real picture of you and the avatar. And over time, you know, the avatar just becomes you. So you reduce that type of distance in power. And the more you think the avatar looks like you, the smaller the distance between power between your here, right, between the brain response to your face and to the avatar face. So in general, I would say that yes, we recognize ourselves on lookalike avatars. And even if the avatar is not really great, over time, we will really recognize it. I think unless you reject it, right? And I post this one here from Spatial, because Spatial has this small tool that you just put your face on an avatar, and it looks, you know, it's not super great. The first time I saw myself, I thought, oh, you know, I look like Angela Merkel. I mean, she's great. But then after a while, it really worked. And it worked more than how it looked like me or not. It's because it was nicely, idly animated, which brings me to the other part that we've been exploring quite a bit, which is, okay, self-representation is in part also the animation of the face, right? So we have two faces here. This one is completely idle, and this one is alive, right? And I'll show it again so you can check the differences. So the one on the right just have some idling animation, saccades, you know, very minimal animations. And it already feels much better. So we did an experiment in which we asked people, there is a morphing task in which you morph from your face to an avatar or from an avatar to your face. Let's see it here. And you're asking people to stop whenever they feel it's no longer them or it's starting to look like them in the other direction, right? So we do that, and then we expose participants to different experiences in which they need to talk in front of a mirror. And then they have the different conditions, which could be just the still avatar, the avatar with just lip sync, or the avatar with lip sync and facial animations, right? What we find is that people look much more on the face the moment you start animating the face, lip sync or also with the animations. And in the morphing task, they stop, it's this difference, the hysteresis is much smaller. So people are really thinking that they are closer to the avatar and the avatar is closer to them when there is animation and lip sync than when there is just a still face or the baseline. And all of this is significant. So I think it's very important that we understand that avatars need to be well animated, right? And that's a key problem, because for good animation, we need a lot of hardware, or perhaps more than hardware, we also need a smart approach with data, right? And we can reconstruct things. So I want to show an example of animation here. It's not facial, it's a full body animation of an experiment we did, and this is published already, where we reconstruct user motions from a small database
We
in real
propose
time.
Cool Moves, a virtual reality system that processes motions from the headset and controllers to synthesize expressive and elegant full-body motions for the user's avatar in real time.
So let me just go back here a little bit. So here is our database for every join. So we only have the 3 input of the head and the hands. For every join, we will calculate a possible best match. And then we will calculate the output pose. So in some cases, the inverse kinematics will be the ideal. In some cases, the ideal will be inside the database, right? So then we apply some smoothing.
Real time.
So it's nicer. And here is a practical
The user's
example.
own input.
So this is a person doing some motions in VR. I know he doesn't have any feet information, just the hands and the head. And this is what we're finding on the database, right? With only these 3 motions, we're reconstructing the one on top. So the ones on the bottom really don't look like what the person is doing. But despite that, we can reconstruct very nicely the motions. And it has an interesting applications, right? Like, for example, you can use databases with different expressions or expressivities, and then you can be sad or happy. You can improve the movements, like, oh, you're bad at dancing, but this database is a good dancing database. So, you get better at it. And you can reconstruct legs. Which is an interesting problem, right? Because we don't have a way to track the legs otherwise. But generally, when we move the hands, in most of the databases, you would move the legs in a particular way when you move the hands. So you can reconstruct legs much nicer than with the regular inverse kinematics. And in general, I think one of the problems with the metaverse, or like with having more people exploring these areas, is that we need tools, we need open source tools for all levels for people to start exploring many things. Because with the avatars part, I just really only show the type of the iceberg. And I've done also some work on behavioral parts, like psychological things like reproducing the Milgram experiment on obedience to authority inside VR with avatars. And there are all these interesting experiments that you can do with avatars, so to explore how people behave with them, etc. And I'm not going to be able to do all of them, so other people should be able to do them. So one of the things I've been working lately is to release a series of open source libraries so people can use avatars and other tools and explore and do more research. And we have the Rocketbox avatars, which is something that I actually used during my PhD. And then I found out that they were part of a Microsoft, and I was able to clean them up and recover them and bring them out to the community. So currently it's open in MIT license. So it's not only for academic use, it's for anyone to use for whatever you want. So this is a library of over 100 avatars that are rigged and are easy to animate. And also I've been working to have compatibility with Mixamo, with the CMU animation database. And the idea here is that, people can use them for whatever they want, for whatever research. And they have the skeletons. It's very nice, the whole Rocketbox avatar library. You can learn more on the GitHub page. And also to make it better in terms of how can we animate them, we released late last year, the Movebox, which is also on GitHub. It's a bit of a complicated tool because it has actually 3 different projects in it. Let me just go here. So this was motivated a bit because when I did my Milgram experiment, it took 6 months of my work to just do it. And it felt like if it takes 6 months in the computer science department of University College London, nobody's going to use this thing, right? It cannot be that way. So
realistic avatars are an essential component for creating social interactions in virtual reality. However, the main issue faced by small labs is a lack of simple self-creation animation tools. In this paper, we present Movebox, a plug-and-play toolbox that aims to provide resources for motion capture and animation of the Microsoft Rocketbox avatars without the need for professional equipment.
So you see, this is kind of the goal here, right? And what we're trying to do here is actually 3 different projects. One is that you can do things in real time, like embodiment experiments. And there is a project there for that with the hand tracking, right? There is, and perhaps with the depth sensing. There is another project where you can reproduce footage, archival footage, here. And you can record yourself and play on avatars.
Into a full body animation clip, which combines. So
let me just show you. It has a very limited facial expression. It's also, very easy to integrate with MRTK or Oculus Quest fingers. It has a couple of interesting aspects. Of course, it works better with Azure Kinect, but if you have your legacy Kinect, you can already use it. We fixed some things with legacy Kinect that have to do with the idea that it's not really 3D. Many of the things are just 2D. And this is a compatibility parser, actually, that we have, that you can import from the Vive work from the Max Planck. So simple models can be imported to the Rocketbox avatars. And that means that you can have a video from YouTube, export the motion capture of it, and then play it inside the Rocketbox avatars, right? Which is a nice setup. The one thing is that this library is not open source. I mean, it's open source, but not only for research purposes. I think check the license, but it's kind of the goal is that we have parsers that you can use the Rocketbox avatars in different ways, and this is a bit of a performance to show how it works. And then you can do crowds, you can do all sorts of simulations with this work. And I wanted to finish, giving a sneak of a new library that we're preparing to release. This approach also means that we're adding all these facts, action units on the face to the avatar, so you can animate with the cameras, with the lip sync, and we're gonna be releasing that soon. One of the challenges here is that, you know, we have all these avatars, so we're trying to do it in a parametric way with Matias Bolonte, who's been working on this almost for a year now. On and off, we've been working on this idea that we need to have better facial animation on the avatars for people to use. So we've been implementing the standards into them, and that will be released also soon. So you see the Rocketbox is becoming a larger set of libraries for people to use, and it's partially because I think, you know, avatars are so important that I want other people to be able to work with them. And in general, if we go back to the metaverse, the research that I've done, it really only fixes very minimal things. There are many other things to be fixed. And I think everybody here in the community can think of ways that their research is really affecting the future of the metaverse. And I think, you know, it's this place where everything that we do research can be applied on. And I want to thanks to my collaborators. And I think I'm ready for questions.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mara. Yeah. Presentation was beautiful, and also I like very much these open tools, which the community really needs. So for about the questions, you can put them by text in the Q&A in Zoom here and down, or you can raise your hand and we can put you able to talk if you like to talk. So there is anybody from the public. So we have almost 100 persons here listening to us. And so please go ahead. So in meantime, maybe Mara, I can have a question for you. Meantime, to break the ice. So very interesting, this research, and then in your position to be also in industrial research is very interesting. So can you somehow prospect us what will happen in the next 20 years or so far in this field?
I think one of the challenges right now is adoption, right? We need more people to use these devices, and on the consumer side, I think we have to deliver things that you cannot do with any other device and that are useful, right? So I think one of the key killer applications actually is to have a lot of real estate for, you know, like you enter here and you can have 3-4 screens, as many as you want. It's portable. It could run on batteries. So I think all of that is important for when we think how something is going to evolve. Is you need to have adoption, right? One of the problems I see is that it's very isolating currently, right? I can put this on, and then if something happens on my mobile phone, I need to take it off to see my mobile phone. And I think it needs to be more fluid. If I receive an email, I cannot check it from the inside. You know, it is this cross interoperability that I sort of hinted at this here, right? Like this fluid in and out, crossing content interaction. I think all of these things need to be solved. And once they're solved, I can see how laptops disappear, sort of, and these type of devices come in to replace laptops. And they replace laptops for the normal desktop activities we do. But once you're there, things start to happen, right? Like the games there don't look anymore like the Minesweeper. It's something different. And I think it would be a bit arrogant from our side to say what it will be, right? But I think it's kind of like on the beginning of PCs, people would be like, oh, what are you going to use it for? And it'd be like, for whatever you want, right? Like if you want to use it to do your accounting, or if you want to do gaming, or if you, it will be just the new form of computing.
I think we have also the first question by Faud. How do you see this metaverse technology in different areas in the future? Great research, congratulations.
Yeah, so I think we're seeing that already a bit. I kind of gave these two examples. One is these meeting rooms, right? Something that is very clear, meeting with other people, especially now that, we cannot travel so much as before, or meet people. This it gives this deeper connection with other people when you're there. And in fact, I think from the games that are out there right now, the table tennis is one of the best ones, right? And you're just playing with someone. Table tennis is not mind-blowing in the sense of a new game. It's been here for longest time, but it's one of the best VR games because it gives this connection and you can play with other people. So I don't think we have to travel into, very different ideas. We just have to implement some of them. And on the other hand, you see these very far-fetched things like the TV show with the avatars singing, and you're like, oh, wow, who thought of that, right? So I think the technology is going to evolve into many areas. I think it's important to note this idea that it intersects with reality, right? And there are these two lines of things on the metaverse. One is that it's going to be this place where it replaces our reality, like we're there instead of in reality. And I think it's not what I think of the metaverse. Is more like this fluid in and out. So almost everything we do now with a computer, we will be able to be doing in a metaverse. I would just say the metaverse is the new operating system, right?
Thank you, Mar.
Like
maybe we have also thinking to Minecraft actually is already a gaming metaverse, yeah. And we have a question from a friend, Joe Gabbard. So, how do we get through cross-content interaction? What are the current barriers?
So I think one of the problems right now, and even if you see some of the Zuckerberg presentations every year at F8, and it evolves over the years, right? And Facebook has been very ambitious, like putting out many different platforms every so often. Now the Horizon Workplace, but there was a Spaces, and they kill them if they don't work. So they are, nobody's very clear where we're going yet. But for me, one of the changes in his mind, which I agree, is this idea that you need it to be an operating system. And cross-content is two things. One, multiple people working with the same, like if you're on a whiteboard, you can work with more people. And also that you can move from your email to the game, to the video on YouTube. This multitasking that we do now is what kills it. And we're not doing this meeting there in VR because I think many of you are doing more things than just watching me, right? Are checking your email, or your kid is around, or you should be able to transition from one to the other. So that's what I mean by cross content interaction, is cross device and cross content.
Great, thank Mar. So I think we run out of time. So it will be very kind if you can join us in Gather Town right now, and because we have the virtual coffee break, like Italian style, and in Piazza, and then also maybe you can stay a little bit in Q&A room A1, so people who wants to meet you personally can enjoy virtual metaverse in our Gather Town.
Okay, sure. See you there. Thank you for
very
having
much.
me. Bye.
So thank you, everybody. We can close this session and see you together in the other town. Thank you. Bye.